to expand what it describes as, and I'm going to quote here, a security zone in Rafah. Talk to us about the possible reasoning for this.
Well, what we'll see, particularly in the last couple of hours, there has been some sort of like more confined Israeli military move on the ground in an interesting location, relatively speaking, and that is the eastern outskirts of Rafah, in proximity to the Gaza-Egypt border and not so far from the Rafah crossing. The interesting thing about that specific area, it's called Al-Janina, is that it's kind of like closer to the eastern part of Rafah, thus it's closer to the area of the military perimeter dividing between Gaza and Israel that Israel has established following the October 7 attack. That move, I think, should be viewed in the wider context of the Israeli seemingly multi-stage plan to increase pressure on Hamas in Gaza Strip. We don't see yet, I think, a massive ground operation as it has been described. Maybe in some areas that is not the case. We are looking at something that is more confined. It can be viewed, however, as part of what we call rolling and expanding ground operation.
Okay, that being the case, do you think this will actually add even more pressure on Hamas to release more hostages as Israel has demanded in the last few weeks?
The challenge in the end of the day is not more pressure or less pressure, because in the end of the day, Hamas only cards remain is the issue of the hostages. Thus, Hamas has no intention, apparently, to end this whole thing and to release all the hostages. The Israeli government, on the other hand, as one of its goals, basically vowed to eliminate Hamas rule in Gaza Strip. So you got a situation where it's kind of like cul-de-sac, where both parties are actually locked in this loop. And therefore, the scenario of releasing all the hostages as Israel is demanding seems to be like non-achievable at this point.
Let's turn now to what's happening in Lebanon on the border with Israel as well. Now, we know that Israel had fired missiles into southern Lebanon, saying that this is in retaliation for missiles fired into Israel. Now, Hezbollah there in Lebanon has denied any accusation that it was behind those missiles that were being fired into Israel. The Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam, has ordered that the decision for Lebanon to go to war lies with the state and not with Hezbollah. Is there much truth to that statement, given Hezbollah's political influence?
Well, up until now, that was not the case. I mean, Hezbollah is the one that was dictating, in the end of the day, decision about war and peace in Lebanon, and the Lebanese constantly demand Hezbollah to disarm itself and not to be the one that making that decision. We should remind ourselves that Hezbollah dragged Lebanon to this war against the Lebanese will and against their urge not to be dragged into this war. Today, the situation is that the Lebanese state is kind of like in a very early stage of a very long, convoluted process trying to rehabilitate its stolen or kidnapped sovereignty that was kidnapped by the Hezbollah. So yet we are looking at a very long and convoluted process. Potentially, it has a positive potential, of course, but the way there is very long, because one of the major challenges is we should remind ourselves, Hezbollah still keep military capacities in Lebanon, and Hezbollah still has no intention to disarm itself. Similar to the story of Hamas, as long as Hezbollah is keeping military capacities in Lebanon, it is very difficult to see how the Lebanese are able, in the end of the day, to restore their sovereignty on the ground.
That being the case, though, and given that Israel had previously targeted Hezbollah's crucial leadership, this is before this so-called ceasefire that was agreed on and implemented in November. Is the militant group still a powerful regional influence?
Yes, the answer is yes, because we are looking that beyond Hezbollah, you got presence of Palestinian militias that are mostly scattered in the Palestinian refugee camps in different parts of Lebanon, particularly the south part of Lebanon. This is one example. Adding to that the fact that, in fact, in many households in Lebanon, you got weapon. People are holding weapon, and it's almost something that is ordinary. In other words, when a functioning state, has a situation where there are inner militias that are operating parallel to the state and defying the state's authority, and people are holding weapon and there is no ability to govern that, this is a recipe for a disaster. This is to a large extent what happened in Lebanon. So in the context of restoring sovereignty, one of the major challenges is not only to disarm all those ex-state factors in Lebanon, but also to create a new culture where people are not holding weapons in their home, and every time there is something, people are just pulling out the weapon. So we are looking at a change that is both politically and not less culturally.
Mm. Middle East strategic analyst Avi Melamed, we thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you for having me.